Thank you, Andy, again, and thanks for your continued leadership in this space. Again, your service to the country. I want to next turn, as you previewed, to my friend, colleague, the former acting national cyber director, and now the president of Paladin Global Institute, Kemba Walden, to bring on our first panel, Disruption.
Thank you, Andy. I have a mic here, but I don't know how to strap it onto myself. So I'm going to talk here, and then we'll figure out how to get me a mic over here, handheld. Good. So thank you. Welcome to all of you in the room. Thank you, Andy, for your opening remarks. Senator Kane, all of those that are online. This is being live streamed. I'm going to call each member of the panel up here. You've all heard me talk a lot. I will talk a little, but I mostly want you to hear from my panel members. So Amy Hogan from Microsoft, you can come forward. Kevin Sherry from Darkweb IQ. Tim Court from UKNCA. Oh, there you are. Maya Song from the U.S. Department of Justice. And Brett Leatherman from the FBI. Please join me. You would think by now I know how to strap one of these on to me, but I've never actually done it on myself. So welcome. I've been involved with the Ransomware Task Force since its inception, and much has been said, but not enough has been said about how Phil Reiner, with his brainchild, pretty much lied to all of us and told us on the Ransomware Task Force that this would be minimal work, and but we have to get after this problem. I promise, and we still work with him. So I'd like to welcome my panelists. They will introduce themselves more fully as we get into the conversation, but I want to be able to take a few moments to sort of set us up for the conversation. I'll describe a little bit of what this ransomware as a service ecosystem looks like, and then we will talk through some operational examples of disruption, and then we will talk about some of the legal and policy frameworks moving forward. So as Andy aptly laid out and as laid out in our Ransomware Task Force report, we are now in a world of ransomware as a service. The ransomware actors are getting smarter, but still there's work to be done. We have a system where the costs for entry into this crime is low. It doesn't take much talent to get into the crime of ransomware, but the profitability is still too high. So with this imbalance, we have figured out a series of policy options and solutions, some disruption options and solutions to raise the cost of entry into ransomware, sort of throwing salt into the gears or sand into the gears, but also attack the profitability. In this panel, we will talk about the disruption opportunities. The very last panel at the end of the day, we'll talk about disrupting the payment system. So in a ransomware as a service model, you might have initial access through our tried and true means. That would be a hanging RDP, a VPN that's open, single factor authentication, phishing emails, and the like. The trends change, but generally speaking, that's what the initial access looks like. You will have another ransomware actor then be an expert in stealing credentials. They will be able to sell or use credentials. Those credentials then would be used to elevate access privileges. Then there might be use of some sort of off-the-shelf software that's being used inappropriately for lateral movement, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That lateral movement then will allow for another malware to be installed to establish some type of persistence. That persistence then will lead to some type of data exfiltration after they look for and understand your system and find your high-value assets. They will find some sort of data, exfiltrate that. Then the ransomware, when we often refer to ransomware group, we're actually talking about the ransomware itself will be installed to lock up a system. And then after that, the ransomware actor can start to demand payments, can leak data, and will then look to cash out after receiving payment through the crypto system and cash out through the fiat system. So there are opportunities for operational disruption along that entire supply chain. So now I'm going to stop talking so much, and I'm going to turn to the panel, and maybe we'll start talking about as far left of boom as we can. I know Microsoft, Amy, you had some success in Storm 1152. If you might want to describe that.
Interesting.
It'll take 3 seconds. Okay.
More than 3 seconds? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. No. We'll just pass the mic. Okay, there we go. Amy Hogan-Burney, as Kemba said, from Microsoft. I lead our cybersecurity policy and protection team, which includes the Microsoft's digital crimes unit, which is really largely why I'm here today. I've been super fortunate as a previous US government employee to take the talent and skills that I learned there and be able to use them in the private sector. And before I get to Storm 1152, I do want to say something about, I hear so much about public-private partnership. As a member of the private sector, I think one thing that we don't talk enough about is the need for private-private partnership. And nobody says anything about that. But it is incredibly important because I have a single view at Microsoft, but it's really important to bring along other technology companies. And I believe that this is the most important area where we should set aside competition. And I just think that we kind of set the tone for today, it's incredibly important for private sector companies that are in this room and even beyond as you go out into the world to set aside competition in this exact ransomware space. There is absolutely no reason for it. And so with that in mind, I do want to talk about Storm 1152, which is a financially motivated cybercrime actor. It is a cybercrime as a service that was used in ransomware attacks and other things. And we partnered with Arcos Labs in that case, which is the service, for those of you who don't know, if you click on all the bicycle tires when you get in for CAPTCHA, in order to say that you're a real human, Arcos Labs, that's courtesy of them. And what happened is that because there was a tool out there that was able to bypass all of the CAPTCHA services, they were, these cyber criminals located in Vietnam were able to create massive numbers of Microsoft accounts. But it wasn't just Microsoft accounts, it was Google accounts, it was everything else, anything that you needed as a vector for cybercrime. And because we have started to think about how do we look kind of broader and how do we look as far left as possible, and because we had done lots of work to try to defeat this in the service itself with both Arcos Labs and with our identity folks at Microsoft, we were like, okay, now we really need to think about disruptive action in this space. And so we partnered with Arcos and seized the website that hosted the tool itself and the website that was actually selling the MSAs for this cyber criminals. And with that case is still open at this time. So we're conducting discovery now, looking to seize more infrastructure. And recently, one of my colleagues that many of you know, Sean Farrell, just came back from Vietnam, where he was there working with law enforcement there, because we know exactly where these 3 people are. And so this is just kind of one example of how do we partner with a private sector company? How do we look as far left as possible?
Thank you, Amy. That was an extraordinary point that you made, private-private partnerships are just as important. And you talked about infrastructure disruption. Another opportunity for disruption is sort of figuring out how these gangs operate and work across with each other. Kevin, I don't know if you want to walk us through some of your thoughts for disrupting the people part of this.
Yes, I never heard the phrase private-private partnership until just now. So, and I love it. I'm Kevin Sherry. I'm the founder and CEO of Darkweb IQ. And we were founded as a public-private partnership about 3 years ago with the main aim of identifying vulnerable and weak points in the supply chain that Kemba just so beautifully laid out. This has also morphed into some private-private partnerships that we never really dreamed of, because some vulnerable parts in this ecosystem are the threat actors that are finding ways to crack certain tools and legitimate tools that cybersecurity firms and professionals will use in their day-to-day, like to help them move laterally across networks. And so naturally, we ended up evolving into some of these private partnerships where we work with those vendors to actually help them upgrade their software and deploy certain patches. And then that ends up morphing into public-private partnerships where we're working with the Bureau and that vendor, not just to help them improve the safety of their software, but also to go after the threat actors themselves. So that's an aside. I didn't mean to get into that. And I'm eager here to listen to Brett and Tim talk about some of the big disruptions. But when we think of disruption, I think of it really in 4 different buckets. There's offensive action, like some of the ones we're probably going to hear about today. There's payment disruption. I think there's a panel later today on that. There's supply chain disruption, and then there's law enforcement, the law enforcement angle, where really it's about putting people in jail. And that's, in our view, the biggest and the most important element of disruption over the long term. There are a lot of criminals out there that they get into this game because they want to live large. They want to live their dream life, even if they're based in Russia or some of these hard to reach countries. They still want to go on that yacht in the Mediterranean, go rent a villa somewhere beautiful and go travel. And so there are ways to deter a lot of the criminals even there. And one of the things we've learned, though, is that when you factor in that whole supply chain that Kemba just talked about, you often will hear law enforcement can't be effective because they're all in Russia. Well, that's when we're talking about a lot of the ransomware operators themselves. When you start thinking about the larger supply chain that really fuels and enables the ransomware actors, there are a lot of them that are outside of Russia, outside of Iran, outside of China and North Korea. They are in countries where you can reach them. There are, as we look over the next 2 to 3 years, for those who caught the 60 Minutes episode a couple of weeks ago, Allison Nixon was talking about a community called the COM. That's mostly North America and Western Europe. And if that community starts partnering more with the ransomware over time, more and more law enforcement really becomes the deterrent that is really needed. And so where we focus is, you think about these big macro disruptions that happen. They're really impactful. We actually took a different approach, and we partner with the Bureau, the DOJ, every day now. We focus on micro disruptions. We focus on infiltrating the supply chain in a way that where we can source intel to stop attacks literally every day, one at a time. And through that, we not only protect our customers and society, we're sourcing intel that can fuel all those 4 buckets that I was talking about, whether it's offensive actions, payment disruptions, or most importantly, from our perspective, helping the Bureau actually unmask these threat actors and build cases against them. And so our motto, one of our mottos internally, is from the law enforcement side, public sector results at private sector speeds. And so I think there are some lessons there from our last 2 to 3 years of operating in close collaboration with them, where some of them apply to the rest of the threat intel industry, if you will. And we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Maya, did you want to jump in there?
I did. Does the microphone work?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm Maya Song. I am Senior Counsel to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, where I advise the Department of Justice on cybercrime, cybersecurity, and emerging technology issues. And I should note that the views I expressed today are my own and not necessarily the department's. So just to piggyback on that point from the law enforcement perspective, I will say that indeed, over the past few years, the department's keen focus and concentrated effort to pivot to a disruption model is now yielding results insofar as, for example, in the past year, what we've seen as a result of greater collaboration with international colleagues and also with the private sector, we're seeing a marked increase in tempo of public disruption announcements. And exactly as you said, that's at all areas of the ransomware criminal ecosystem. So whether that's going after ransomware actors themselves and taking down infrastructure, or going after illicit cryptocurrency service providers or malware botnets, at the Department of Justice, we are keenly focused on seizing every opportunity that we can to do disruption. And in an effort to do that, of course, we rely quite heavily on private sector partnerships. And so really can't underscore that enough, that in our effort to adapt to the ever-evolving landscape of the ransomware threat, it is critical for us at the Department of Justice and at FBI to make sure that we are getting victim reporting early so that we too can be getting the full picture of the landscape as it's evolving so quickly.
This is a really productive conversation in my mind. So there are a lot of things that came up. I'm going to try to pull some of those themes and try to leave time for questions at the end. One of the themes Amy's kicked off with was private. Kevin sort of described how that works in a different operational capacity, the way that Amy did. Let's talk a little bit about public and fan out a bit. Fan out meaning I'm a fan of the public partnership. So just like Andy got giddy when he saw the takedown of Lockbit, I started texting a couple of people when I saw the takedown of Lockbit because I was very excited. And Brett and Tim, if you want to give us, since we've gone from a little bit over from left of boom, sort of give us your perspective on that Maya started with the takedown across the ecosystem, what that experience was like. Maybe if you want, talk about Lapsus or Scattered Spider. I've been following you, trolling you a little bit.
Certainly. So good morning. Firstly, you'll notice that my hair's the other way around to Keith's. So I'm the head of operations for the National Crime Agency, which is effectively the UK analog of the FBI. And certainly the Lockbit activity was hugely predicated on an international collaboration between ourselves and other partners across European kind of EC3 Europol servers. The way that we approach that is we moved towards an ecosystem model approximately a year ago. And really that was based on us chasing incidents and really eating resource for no real benefit. So we dragged ourselves, to your point, left on that chart, trying to understand the underlying systems, the underlying services and intent that was really feeding ransomware strains writ large. And then began a sort of 2-year effort to technically subvert Lockbit, which of course everyone was trying to do. But the ability to coordinate and discuss openly with partners at a classified level and sometimes in a very standard kind of normal business classification, who had what, who could do what, and which best framework and which capability best delivered the outcome, which we all wanted, which was break trust in Lockbit. And I think for us in the UK, there's a capacity issue. You know, we have less, we have to be very discerning. So what we focused on was how to essentially ridicule or undermine trust in Lockbit so much that nobody went near it. You know, the model had evolved from discrete organized crime groups that were quite insular to a business program of franchise. Well, we need to make that franchise brand so toxic that no one goes near it. But in the past, Brett and I would have had agents both chasing that down, probably burning resource on both sides of the pond, and that's unacceptable. So early on, engaging with Brett's team, understanding our kind of joint objectives, and then also who was going to lead what in a coordinated fashion was what led to ultimately Lockbit being disrupted in the way that it was. I mean, probably a good point to hand over to you.
Yeah. So the NCA's access to that technical infrastructure was incredible, and it gave all of us an opportunity to come together. Instead of NCA saying, hey, we've got this access, we're going to move forward and do something with it. That global effort to impose cost on Lockbit actors is what made this such a significant disruption to that group, and sent a message to other groups operating out of Russia and elsewhere that this is the free world's effort to free victim organizations from kind of that ransomware tyranny that we see over and over again. And so when we look at disruptions, some disruptions are more enduring than others, and we fully recognize that, both at Justice and FBI. But what we look at is, what are our capabilities right now, and what is happening to private sector agencies, critical infrastructure, or government agencies? How are these actors targeting them? What is the impact of that targeting? If we can leverage even a temporary disruption against critical infrastructure or hospitals or elsewhere, we're going to take that action, because even providing weeks of relief can allow folks to retool and build resilience into their environments. And so we endeavor to do more enduring disruptions where we can. And to do that, we look at really targeting the 5 key services within the criminal enterprise or the criminal ecosystem. That's the actors themselves, the technical infrastructure that they operate from, the financial modalities by which they receive their profits, the communication platforms that they talk on, either amongst each other or to victims, and finally, the tools and the malware that they use. The more of those that we can take out during a disruption, the more effective and the more enduring that disruption will be. We can't do it alone, and so we leverage our IC partnerships here with all our partners, Andy's former colleagues over at CIA, NSA, Cyber Command, CISA, DHS, and increasingly, cyber is border agnostic. We have to leverage our closest partnerships to have that kind of impact. And when you see these kind of disruptions that have real impact, you will see multiple seals globally on those technical disruptions for good reason. And that's because we engage those partners early. But it's also the private sector piece that is so important. Microsoft, for example, has tremendous telemetry. So does Google, so does Amazon, so does everybody else. They have better visibility into shifts in actor TTPs and IOCs than what we have. But if we can identify how the adversaries are moving in a very high level way, we have very good targeted collection that we can do. And so that private sector tipping can provide us the ability to really get up on individual actors or groups, and then ultimately pursue those actors and groups for disruptive opportunities.
So just following on from that, something that we've really focused on was the psychological operation that was played out in Lockbit. And we realized that because, and back to Andy's point around CT, these are individuals in a criminal enterprise who are not tested. They haven't come through a traditional law enforcement criminal engagement. They're not running through the prison system. Neither are they ideologically motivated to withstand immense pressure. They've hidden behind a screen. They're often anonymous, and they're making a lot of money. So actually imposing cognitive fear in their life was something that we really focused on. And certainly, let's be blunt, there's a cold wind blowing across Europe at the moment, but that also means lots of young men are running, and they're across Europe. And we've picked up quite a few now in sort of sub judice still, but individuals who are Russian language, who don't want to be part of the regime, don't want to be conscripted, are active cyber criminals, and they are not just in Moscow. So enabling us to target the 200 affiliate groups, they won't be exclusively in places we can't get them. So explaining to them, quite clearly that any badge on those takedowns will come after you, and you will find yourself in a space that you're not comfortable with. We're seeing the benefit of that starting to suppress confidence in the impunity of the ransomware model. And I think that's key. We need to press that button more and more.
I'm seeing a lot of novel action here from, now that I'm back out on the outside looking in. I'm seeing a lot of action here, and I've been particularly entertained by how you were messing with the enemy, so to speak. That was a lot of fun to watch. But pivoting to another novel, what I find, I'm nerding out. I think somebody coined the term nerd riz. There's a Amy, I want you to talk about Amy, I want you to talk about what you've been able to do in terms of private partnership with cracked uses of Cobalt Strike. I think this is quite helpful.
Yeah. So, and this started when you were at Microsoft, Kemba. So Kemba should get all the credit in the world. Because, and actually really one of our investigators, the best cases, and I think everyone in this room knows this, the best cases come from the people who are closest to the problem, right? And so several years ago, one of our investigators, Jason Lyons, he noticed that as he was studying all of the ransomware actors that were out there and looking at all of the ones that we tracked as part of our threat intelligence process, they all had a common mechanism by which they moved laterally throughout systems once they entered them. And they were all using cracked Cobalt Strike, the illegitimate use of Cobalt Strike. And so the first thing that we did actually is we looked at, were we as Microsoft hosting cracked Cobalt Strike? Because that means we're part of the problem. And we don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. And so we took down every single version of cracked Cobalt Strike that was out there on our own systems. And we actually continue to do that today. And so, the first kind of thing you can always do is clean your own house. The one thing I will tell everyone is that in order to clean your own house, you have to know you have a problem. And so you need to be constantly looking for these types of threats. But once your own house is clean, and we were actually a very small part of the cracked cobalt strike problem. We did share information with other cloud service providers. Amazon, AWS in particular, were really great about receiving the information and just cooperating and taking things down with us in the early stages of this 2.5 years ago. Once that was done, then we looked out into the ecosystem and thought, okay, how do we go after the other providers that are hosting cracked cobalt strike? Some of them far less cooperative, and many of them located outside the United States. And so we partnered with Fortra, who owns Cobalt Strike, which is a great legitimate pen testing tool, and they want to do everything they can to protect the tool. It's incredibly useful for security researchers and others. And so what we did was they gave us every single watermark for every single version of cracked cobalt strike out there. We were able to use that to reverse engineer it and identify every single command and control out there in the world. And we continue to this day to take down either through court intervention, if it's located inside the United States, or through notice and takedown, or through working with governments, all of the versions of cracked cobalt strike. As you can imagine, in some jurisdictions, we are more successful than others. We partnered with the US government very closely, and in this case, many of the versions of cracked cobalt strike are located inside China. In the beginning, we saw absolutely no C2s come down in China. Then, for some reason, which I do not understand, but maybe US government officials in this room do, we saw a giant decrease in C2s that China was hosting. They actually started paying attention to things that we asked them to take down. We've seen an uptick again. I'm not sure why, what they're using it for, or when we will see another thing come down, but we actually made a conscious decision to make clear that where even governments may not take action, that we would do notice and takedowns and make it abundantly clear that these things were a problem. That case is still open because we still see it happening. We are seeking a special master so that we'll continue to invest here and take Cobalt Strike down. And I think I said to someone early in the room, we see our own telemetry where we're like, okay, this is successful. But Red Canary came out with a report the other day that said that cracked cobalt strike last year was number 9 or 8 or 9 in the use of tools that were used by ransomware actors, and it's dropped to 19. And so I was really pleased to see that type of result.
So that I'm very excited about that particular action. And also, I think there was an intermediary court order that described the ransomware actors involved under RICO, which is also for a legal nerd exciting. Speaking of legal nerds, and I can call Maya a legal nerd. Maya, we've talked a lot about the ecosystem ransomware as a service. How do we disrupt operationally? You've been focused at DOJ a little bit on the payment side, and I know we're going to talk about payments at the end of the day. But in order to complete this circle, if you can give us sort of some insight from your perspective at DOJ about payment takedowns, I would.
Sure. And this was an effort we undertook at the department to concentrate our expertise on cryptocurrency and going after illicit services in that sphere. So we set up the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team a few years ago. FBI set up the Virtual Assets Unit. And we have also developed expertise at U.S. attorneys' offices. And what that has yielded is success in terms of going after the providers of illicit cryptocurrency services, where we are extending U.S. anti-money laundering laws to providers such as Binance, who in November pleaded guilty to violating anti-money laundering laws. Binance being the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, they agreed, and their CEO pleaded guilty as well, to paying over $4 billion in restitution and fees, which is one of the United States' largest settlements. And so that is an effort for us to underscore the point that if you provide services, cryptocurrency services in the United States, you'll be subject to our laws. And of course, that's just one example. The NSET team that I mentioned, along with U.S. Attorney's Office and other agency partners last month, obtained a guilty verdict after a jury trial against the founder of one of the longest running cryptocurrency mixing services, which had been a go-to service. This is Bitcoin Fog for many crypto cyber criminals. And so we have that. We have a string of these sorts of examples from last year. Bitslotto being another one that comes to mind, where we dismantled Bitslotto in January of last year, and the founder pleaded guilty in December. Bitslotto having laundered millions of proceeds in ransomware. This is an example of our effort at the Department of Justice to, again, go after that part of the ecosystem to make it not profitable, which of course cryptocurrency is the lifeblood of this ransomware ecosystem.
This is exciting for me. So after 3 years of the Ransomware Task Force, many of the operational disruption recommendations that we promulgated just as a think tank, we've seen in action now in many ways, but there's still some work to be done, not to take away from the work that has been done, but a couple of the outstanding actions, if we can pivot a little bit, I'm just going to name the three in the interest of time, open it up for anybody to comment. One was being a little bit more clear about what companies and enterprises can do to protect themselves or to take down, as in terms of what is a defensive measure, what is the line that we can move to where we're not violating the CFAA as a private sector partner. Another is more instances of information sharing, particularly across borders, and how does that look? There have been some things on the table. The UN treaty was something that was put on the table. If any panelists want to talk about sort of defensive measures and how we to clarify that, what we can do better in terms of sharing information, operationalizing things across borders a little bit better. I love the work that's been done so far, but want to open it up. Kevin, you want to start?
I'll talk about the data sharing, maybe not, and it's not so much from a policy perspective. It's more from, I think, really speaking to other private sector firms out there, where, you know, I kind of view this ransomware problem as a big puzzle, and we're all trying to put it together, and it's complicated. You can't see all of it. You can see little bits of it at a time. And if we go back 2 to 3 years, where, you know, when we initially launched, we were validating ideas. We had assumptions about how the ecosystem worked, how prosecutions and cases got built, for example. And in the beginning, it was, let's just throw all the intel we can get at all the different case agents all over the place, right? Little things like you have all these learning moments where you're like, well, this is how a case gets built. It's not the way necessarily we thought. And so rather than just, you know, send a 50-page dossier on a threat actor over, which could slow an agent down, we'll highlight, like, these are the 2 vendors we recommend subpoenaing, issuing a subpoena to. And here's a section, like, you might not want this section now, but later in the investigation you might. So there's all these learnings that you can just, you go through. But the data sharing, I think, is really important. Not just doing it, but also figuring out how to do it. Where do you send it? How do you send it? And then sharing with international partners. So the private sector can share it with other law enforcement agencies. We partner with the NCFTA, where the FBI agents have agents are stationed there, but also the NCA from UK has an agent stationed there. The Royal Mounties from Canada have an agent stationed there. And so we're able to feed intel now to other law enforcement departments in a coordinated fashion, right? So there's not 3 different law enforcement agencies necessarily devoting resources into one threat actor. It's instead, you know, aligning over the intel that exists, and really helping, you know, create more focus and speed for the various agencies out there. And so this is less of a policy thing. This is more of from a private sector perspective. There are an army of researchers out there that are hungry, that want to solve this problem too, and are looking for ways how to. And I think that's one of the things we're really trying to contribute to the ecosystem, is kind of creating that map.
If I could just build on that for 1 second, which is, in addition to sharing the information, because I've used that puzzle analogy myself also before. So I was like, oh yes, the puzzle. One thing to think about when you're talking about the puzzle is, when you share information, the idea of what action can the person you're sharing it with take. And I always try to make sure that information we get from other private sector partners, from government, it is, what action can I take myself? Because those are the things that are frankly easiest to do. And then the other piece I will just add to that is, I think we can be incredibly successful where we kind of set aside ego and allow someone else to take that action. So often what we will do is look and say, this is a problem that we frankly cannot solve. And so we need to make sure that as early as possible also, we give the information to someone else who may be able to take that action, whether they're in the US or beyond the US, cooperating with international partners and both public and private sector.
But when it comes to disruption, and deterrence, it's not just the US government that has a stake. And I think that's important to note here for everybody. There's deterrence by offense and there's deterrence by defense. And I would argue that we have room to grow on both. And we're working to do that. When we talk about technical disruptions on the US government's part, like I do feel like every Tuesday, just another Tuesday here is like in the FBI, like we are weekly, it feels like, doing some sort of technical operation, not against ransomware actors specifically, but just yesterday we had the 3 Iranians that we indicted for targeting US-based companies and organizations. So I feel like the cadence is there. We need to scale it much better, and we have to do it efficiently, and we need resources to do that. Just a quick plug for that. But on the defensive side, we deter by building resiliency into private sector companies and critical infrastructure. And we do that by getting intelligence and trying to figure out, like Amy said, what do I do with this? What can I do with this, right? These actors right now are opportunistic. Most of these attacks are leveraging CVEs from 2019, 2020, 2021. Like those tend to be lower hanging fruit to identify ways to patch those environments. And so we have to look at building resiliency into the human vulnerabilities. That is the social engineering piece. Scattered Spider is a great example of actors who are doing a good job at evolving to identify ways to exploit, phishing resistant. We have to find resistant MFA, for example, to defend against that. But the technical vulnerabilities, the human vulnerabilities, and then protecting our environments. Living off the land right now is what the actors are doing. They're leveraging tools in our environment to persist, to remain undetected. And so I think there's work to do on all our parts to deter going forward.
Just following up on the idea of that public-private partnership and private-private, we've experienced in the UK a situation where industry is very well docked in, because of 9/11, into the IC community. It's also well docked into the law enforcement community, but those things have not traditionally overlapped. And our Venn diagrams of offending now in cyber are absolutely merging. So, we indicted and sanctioned FSB agents that led, purely from a crime investigation. So the mechanisms we have serviced us well for the last decade. They're probably not yet able to effectively merge the tools that governments have and the tools that industry have in a way that responds to this threat. I still feel like we're consciously having to talk across our borders at times, internally, let alone internationally. And that's probably where we need to get to in the next couple of years, if not 12 months' time.
Maya, do you get the last word? And then if we have time, I'm looking at the organizers, we can open up for questions.
I can briefly comment on the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act point, although what the department has done since the IST report first came out is not exactly responsive to the recommendation, since I understand that's really directed to Congress. 2 years ago, the department did, with the expertise of our computer crime and intellectual property section, we did clarify our policy when it comes to prosecuting under the CFAA good faith security research, cybersecurity research, which was important for us to clarify, even though it was left unspoken that we would not prosecute those kinds of activities. We wanted to provide that clarification as a recognition that that sort of good faith security research is so critical to cybersecurity.
Those of you in the room that know me, I'm a huge fan of good faith research and researchers and the work that they do. I am going to open it up for questions if we have time. Megan? Okay, good. Anyone has any questions? I think Taylor is going to move around the room to hand over the mic.
This one work? Yeah. Thank you all for the discussion. Excuse me, I'm Lizzie Cookson. I do ransomware negotiations for Coveware. And I just want to say what happened with Lockbit. It was like the best day of my life. I'm still telling people about it, even though it's a couple months past. But I totally agree that sowing distrust and applying that cognitive distress and making it toxic is what will have the biggest scalable effect. This is a little bit of a different question, and I might be jumping the gun. This might be more deter. Scattered Spider is the one that really keeps me up at night because they are not financially motivated in the traditional sense. I've negotiated with a bunch of them. Some of them even ask for a monetary demand. They just want to show off. So my concern is that with ransomware actors, if you take away the incentive, money, they'll think about doing something else. It's much harder to de-incentivize spider actors from doing what they're doing. So I would love any thoughts that you have on how we start with that.
Yeah, it keeps us both up at night, I think, as well. I think that's absolutely right. And I think what we have, and I reflect on this a lot, and we had Lapsus as an example in the UK, the neat buckets of you're an APT, you're a ransomware group, you're a hacktivist, they're gone. So for Lapsus, and I will hand over to Brett around Scattered Spider, they are kinetically dangerous across multiple threats, and they do not behave in a way that we would like them to. So we are very keen, and I suspect their OPSEC is a bit less good at times. They tend to be a bit more chaotic, a bit more clumsy with their information. We need to get quite quickly into an aggressive pursue option there, because with Lapsus, we had a young man who was hacking multi-billion-dollar companies, not demanding ransoms, causing chaos, and also committing horrendous physical harm in a kind of CSAM space. So he was just a good old-fashioned target. But actually getting from that recognition of they will be in the ransomware space, and increasingly so, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that connection into industry of, hey, look, this is chaotic and we need to get in there quite quickly is probably the key. But
Yeah, I think deterrence comes in a variety of different ways. And so, in the ransomware space, a lot of times it's taking the money away from these actors or denying them the ability to continue to exploit private sector. Deterrence is going to look a little bit different in the Scattered Spiders case. I mean, that is a broad set. We're talking about thousands in the comm, and then Scattered Spiders, that smaller group within that. When you are in Western countries, you are a little bit more, I guess, we can reach out and touch you a little bit more through disruptive operations. And we are doing that now on Scattered Spider. And I think we will continue to leverage every criminal authority available to us, every partnership available to us to de-obfuscate who they are and engage in disruptive action. And so they communicate amongst each other a lot. And so that deterrent action does tend to ripple through the group. And so we'll continue to pursue them, leveraging every opportunity and every authority that we have.
Good. Thank you for your question. It was a good question. Scattered Spider in particular in Lapsus, and we pointed this out in the CSRB report on Lapsus, the nature of those threat actors is a little troubling, a lot troubling. Any other questions? Okay, so we have one and then two.
My name is Mark. I'm one of the founders of Digital Asset Redemption, which is on the right of boom, pay the bad guys side. So Lizzie, I think, is describing the oldest incentive in the hacker universe, which is lulz, right? They're hacking for lulz. But Amy, you mentioned, private-private partnership, and human psychology. Everyone and everything responds to incentives. And like me, as a small business, I have an incentive to cooperate with this group. Microsoft, as the purveyor of half the world's data, has incentive to. But what are the incentives for the medium-sized enterprise where their data is 25% of their value to share? What is their incentive to provide information to the public sector when they literally are unable to get anything back? And I get it, you want to be a good actor, but there needs to be, I think, more definition around what the incentives are for participating.
Yeah, so I think that is a fair point. I'll talk first about private, just to talk about how sometimes the smallest amount of information from a small or medium-sized business that is shared with Microsoft, we always take that, and if we can do any action at all, including closing down accounts, using it to review how actors are working across services, if we can tie it to a threat actor, we always share that information back and with the person who provided us the original indicator of compromise or otherwise, for the reasons that you pointed out, right? Because it's important to understand that what you have provided to us has value. Now, that's far more difficult when I provide information to the US government. I will be honest with you, we've done 25 referrals in scattered spiders. And the amount of information we've gotten back is not the same, right? And there's logical reasons for that, but it does sometimes feel like, are you just throwing that information away? And we are a very large company, and so we have the ability and resources to provide those 25 referrals. When it's a small company, how do you provide that information and know that there is value there? So I agree with you. Calling out, I think, and I think the Department of Justice and FBI and others have done a great job. And the UK also, same thing, calling out where information was provided by the private sector and it made a difference. That helps, right? I can't tell you how motivating it is for the individual investigator at Microsoft, who is the one who provided that information, to see it called out in some way that the private sector had a meaningful difference, right? And so I think for small businesses, I know it's very hard to keep track of everybody, but as you're thinking about announcing these big Lockbit type takedowns, how the government can also provide a quick, also fact sheet of, and here's all the people that were involved in this from the private sector. It goes to your point, right? Is that there has to be some kind of return on sharing that information.
Yeah, we have 56 field offices located throughout the United States. We consistently try to message the value of engaging your local FBI field office post-breach. So if you reach out, every one of those field offices have a cyber task force, state, local, federal investigators paired with FBI agents. In some cases, we ingest that intelligence. It increases everybody's resilience because we are able to share it with CISA and share it broadly in an anonymized way. And so it builds resilience into the US ecosystem. But it also, if you as a small to medium business haven't seen an adversary on your network before, or this particular adversary on your network before, you may not know how to respond or where they pivot to or what their IOCs or TTPs are. Chances are good the FBI has seen it before. And so contacting the FBI, you at the very least should get intelligence back if you provide us a ransomware variant on what to look for, where they may have gone, where the point of impact may have been, and what the exfiltration looks like. And at most, like especially if you're in critical infrastructure, you will sometimes get tool sets available to you to actually do some of that mitigation or remediation work. In some cases, we are able to obtain decryptors. Lockbit's a great example. Hive, like we've been able to come up with decryptors and provide those. In the Hive takedown, we identified only 20% of victims were reporting to law enforcement, yet we had decryptors for all those victims. So there are value propositions to bringing the FBI in and bringing them early domestically to help you with your hunt efforts for the bad actors.
I might just do the other end of the spectrum. So Brett's talked really clearly about the benefit, the sort of here and now. I think the other answer is because it's existential. Countries there are there around tax and a safe market to do good business and be prosperous. The information that gets provided, certainly to law enforcement and governments, may not be immediately actionable, but the intelligence you provide may persist in our systems and enable us to do something in a year's time. And bear in mind, Lockbit took 2 years to deliver. We are genuinely in a conflict that can undermine, to Andy's point, the stability of our countries. So there's no such thing as a medium enterprise. You're there on the front line of the fastest human evolution we've ever had, and it happens to be in our working lifetime. So your strands of intelligence can be fed into a system that is, paid for by taxes to protect your economy. So for us in the UK, the NCSC was touched on earlier, really, really keen to be agile, really keen to play that information back in an anonymized way alongside intel collection from all sorts of streams to make the UK more resilient and more able to prosper. But also, I think the contract has shifted. You may not always get the immediate response of any more than this was really useful, thank you, because actually it might only be deployed in a year's time. So do we need to get better at that communication? Absolutely. But I think you're on the front line with us on this, and I think your information is absolutely pivotal.
Thank you. Those are all very good points. There's been a lot of improvement in acknowledging when the private sector or a medium or small business, and you're right, there really are no medium or small businesses when they're, but be acknowledging the assistance, but also recognizing that this is a puzzle and sometimes it's not immediately actionable, but still helpful. We had another, do we have, we don't have, we have time? Okay. Should we, okay, you're okay with not, you know where to find me, you know where to find all of them. Thank you very much for your attention. There's a lot still to be talked about throughout the day. I'm looking forward to the deter panel next. Thank you.